Lord of the Mysteries audiobook by Kevin 491, The Sherlock Moriarty and the Investigation Report Leonard. Klein thought for a moment that he was mistaken. However, the blurring caused by the rays of light wasn't that serious. Being familiar with Leonard, he was able to quickly confirm his previous judgment. In the time it took to take a breath, Leonard disappeared, the light dispersed, and the valley returned to its midwinter silence. The scene which Klein saw in the dream shattered as a result. He opened his eyes and placed the badge he had obtained from Lanevis on the surface of the long bronze table. Is it really Leonard, or a faceless disguised as Leonard? Klein considered and flipped a gold coin. His spirituality had told him through the medium that it was Leonard Mitchell, his teammate from the Tinjin Nighthawks team. Is he the investigator sent by the Church of the Goddess for the gathering, or is he risking his life to find an opportunity to find the revenge target while keeping the Nighthawks in the dark? Klein muttered to himself in suspicion. It was hard to make an accurate judgment, and without any leads, his divination couldn't provide him with any revelations. After a few seconds of silence, Klein gave a self-deprecating smile as he drew a crimson moon on his chest. I wish him the best of luck. May the goddess watch over him. Klein no longer bothered with the problem, and he planned on understanding more about the gathering before deciding whether or not to participate in the future or to warn Leonard Mitchell anonymously. Backlund, in a secret room in the basement of the Steam Cathedral. Icancer took off his hat, pressed down his fluffy but not soft hair, and sat in the first seat on the left. Then he took out the ancient silver mirror of arrows from an inner custom-made pocket in his clothes and placed it in front of him. To his right, across him and diagonally across him, were the machinery hivemind deacons and captains, all of whom had been summoned by the member of the Divine Council, the Archbishop of Backlund, Hiramic Haydn, for a meeting. The white-robed archbishop looked like an ordinary old man, sitting calmly at the end. Seeing that everyone had arrived, he looked around and softly said, "Let's start with Icancer. Tell me in sequence about the investigation over the past few days." Icancer Bernard pushed his hair while flipping through the thick document file, and he reported in a concise manner, "Your Grace, we were in charge of Sherlock Moriarty. After a careful investigation and with the aid of beyonder means, we confirmed that he was pulled into the matter. Prior to the incident, there was no evidence that he knew of Prince Edisac's problem. He and the dead Talim Dumont were friends, and he indirectly fulfilled some of the tasks entrusted to him by the prince, but there weren't many problems. At most, he had falsely made some fraudulent claims for his expenses." At this point, Icancer suddenly felt a little worried because Sherlock Moriarty was also an informant for the machinery hivemind, and his expenses here were likely to be somewhat exaggerated. In any case, his job as an informant was very effective and very outstanding, enough to offset a lot of problems, and he hasn't become our informant for long. The money involved was mostly just from commissions. Icancer exhaled slowly and continued to report. Our conclusion is that he's considered an innocent party and that there is no hidden plot behind him. He once keenly noticed the danger of Red Rose Manor, but that is a typical example of coming to the correct conclusion from an incorrect deduction. He was afraid of the royal family's internal strife, and for this reason, he had been slow in his work and didn't do any substantial investigations. On this, he had reported it to us. Unfortunately, he still failed to avoid the matter, but he was lucky enough. He mentioned that the descendant of death happened to be monitoring the vicinity of Red Rose Manor at the time. Hence, he was rescued from the perilous situation when the meteorite fell. The signs at the scene are ample proof of how terrifying that strike was. It's likely due to 008. Klein mentioned the existence of NC Zangwill and 008 in his letter. As for whether or not he knew the former archbishop and the Grade 0 sealed artifact, no one was concerned about it, because he was with Isaac Eggers for some time. It was entirely possible that he learned the information from him. This was also a conclusion that everyone subconsciously came up with. As for matters regarding Grade 0 and Grade 1 sealed artifacts, the 7 Orthodox churches constantly shared information of the rough situation with each other. The numbers were shared, and there was no repetition. However, we haven't been able to grasp the entire situation. There are 3 matters that aren't confirmed. First, 2111 indicates that after Sherlock Moriarty fled into the forest, he didn't immediately escape far away. Instead, he stayed on the spot and prayed to someone. Second, it's still unknown when he and Isaac Eggers got to know each other. Third, it's still unknown how he escaped the underground ruins. It's unlikely that he could have done so with his strength. And in this process, he had even destroyed the descent ritual of the Aurora Order, Icancer finally concluded. 2111 referred to the magic mirror, arrows. Haramek laughed after he listened to the recount and muttered, fraudulent claims of expenses. He then cleared his throat. In any case, Sherlock Moriarty is a hero of Backlund. If he hadn't stopped the ritual in time, and if he had been frightened at that moment and had chosen to flee, then most of us wouldn't be alive sitting here. Moreover, he has also displayed his faith in God and his friendliness towards us. As long as there isn't too much of a problem with him, then we can pretend that we don't know anything about his tiny flaws and secrets. Your Grace, this is what we were thinking as well. Icancer heaved a sigh of relief and said, I guess his prayers in the woods, including the ritual of blowing the copper whistle, were to get in touch with Isaac Eggers. But the effects and speed can be different. In such a critical situation, the only thing he could do was to try to save himself, which is something that we deduced from the follow-up process. Apart from trying to save himself, he could write his will. Another machinery hive mind deacon quipped before he immediately reported the portion he was responsible for. We haven't found the underground ruin which Sherlock Moriarty described, even with the help of 2111. We're still temporarily unable to grasp the locations of the royal family's high-sequence beyonders on that very day. It can be confirmed that the Church of Evernight received the information first. This came from a special channel of Earl Hall, but the specific situation is unknown. Most of the forces of the Aurora Order in Backlund have been eliminated by us, the Nighthawks and the mandated Punishers. However, I suspect that they still have some hidden strength. At the time of the incident, Sherlock Moriarty mentioned that Trissy was heading to Backlund, but no one has seen her ever since. According to Sherlock Moriarty, she was a key figure and was renamed Trissy Cheek. It cannot be determined what method the Church of Evernight used to capture the Demoness of Despair and the butler, Funkel. Results via divination tell me that they're still alive, but they aren't free. One by one, the deacons and captains reported on their findings while Haramek half closed his eyes, seemingly deep in thought. After a few seconds of silence, he opened his eyes and slowly said, "Put all efforts into finding Trissy Cheek if she's still alive. Pass me all the problems where divination has failed to provide any effective revelations. The Church has a saint who is good at this, although it's not necessarily more effective than 2111. As for the surveillance and investigation of the royal family's high-sequence beyonders, it can be tabled. There's no need to worry. They've always known what we've been doing. It's also a form of warning. Continue the search for the underground ruins and report it to the Evernight and Storm churches." Icancer asked 2111 how Sherlock Moriarty escaped the ruins, as well as when he got to know Isaac Eggers. Icancer looked at the Archbishop, then at his colleagues before gritting his teeth and said, "Yes, Your Grace. Find authorized novels in WebNovel Faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting." He was sadly convinced that his legends were about to spread from just a few machinery hive-minds teams that he was in charge of to all the beyonders of the Church of the God of Steam in Backlund. After a very well-rehearsed process, he opened his mouth and said, "Honorable Arrows, my question is, when did Sherlock Moriarty get to know Isaac Eggers?" The silver mirror, which seemed to have eyes on both sides, suddenly started to glow with an aqueous light, quickly forming a scene. Sherlock Moriarty stood in a room, watching a rat with a rotting belly burrow into a hole in a wall. Behind him was old Kohler and the owner of a budget hotel. He got to know Isaac Eggers while completing the bounty mission for him. That mission was issued by Me-9, which originated from a coincidental conflict. Icancer interpreted the scene. With that, he chose to answer the corresponding question. He held his breath as he waited for Arrows to give the soul-piercing question. As expected, he saw the bright red words. Do you know the feeling of trying your best to win the favor of someone, but only to end up being abandoned without any progress? This question isn't sharp enough. It's unlike Arrows's usual style. Icancer suddenly felt that the blood on the mirror seemed to lack its usual horror and bloody sense. It appeared somewhat weak. He didn't bother to think about why and immediately opened his mouth to answer, "Yes. Congratulations, you got it right." A new line of text appeared on the surface of the silver mirror. Its color was somewhat pale. 5th January 9:00 a.m. With a gray scarf around his neck, Klein arrived at Rose Wharf with his suitcase and cane. The white agate was docked there, unusually large compared to the height of a human. It was said to be capable of ferrying hundreds of passengers. It had the rich characteristics of the age, with its chimneys, sails, and its 12 cannons on both sides of the ship necessary for defending against pirates and other piers. Under Captain Elland Cagg's arrangement, the chosen stocky sailors and crew lined up at the mouth of the gangway, some even deliberately revealing their legitimate revolvers, rifles, and knives. This gave the passengers on board the boat a greater sense of security. They were no longer afraid of the journey that would take them 9 days to complete. Klein stood below, looked up, and climbed up the hanging ladder in the undulating blue water. "My travels begin." He took a step forward and sighed silently. 492 adventurer. As soon he stepped onto the deck, and before he could enter the cabin, Klein saw a figure moving through the crowd towards him through the corner of his eye. He looked over his shoulder with an air of indifference but hidden vigilance, and he saw a man in his 30s wearing a black half-top hat and a windbreaker of the same color. The other party had a weathered face, looking boorish but extremely masculine. His light blue eyes didn't contain a smile, as if they were immersed in many past events. "He looks a little familiar, right? He's that guy I noticed at the ticket office yesterday. He seems to be an adventurer as well. He's actually wearing a windbreaker at sea in January. He's quite strong while lifting his cane with ease and pointing diagonally downwards," Klein said with a smile. "Good morning, we meet again." It was like he was greeting an old friend. The boorish man, however, wasn't surprised. He stopped and nodded in a somewhat reserved manner, saying, "Cleves, a former adventurer. Mate, are you in the same trade?" "I thought you knew yesterday. Jam and Sparrow," Klein responded with a smile. He didn't pass his cane to his left hand, because he didn't intend to shake Cleves' hand. "I can tell." Cleves maintained 2 seconds of silence and said, "Being an adventurer isn't a beautiful profession. I've already switched careers and have become a bodyguard. This time, I'm accompanying my employer's family to the capital of the Rörsted archipelago." He half-turned and pointed to another spot on the deck. Klein traced where he was pointing and saw nearly 10 people gathered together. They were led by a plump middle-aged gentleman with ruddy cheeks and spirited eyes. On his double-breasted suit, Klein could see the gold chain from his pocket watch and a jeweled collar brooch. Next to him was a lady in a wide-brimmed hat, her face completely hidden by the dark blue muslin that hung down, and her figure wasn't too bad. Standing in front of the couple were two children. The younger one was a boy who wasn't even 10 years old. He was wearing a child's version of a tailcoat. The older one was 15 or 16 years old and was a lively and energetic teenage girl. Her looks couldn't be considered outstanding, but her pair of brown eyes were quite bright and intelligent. Her faint freckles and puffy dress added to her playfulness. Around them were three people carrying suitcases and all sorts of items, a man and two women, all dressed as servants. One of the maids had brownish skin, clearly of southern continent heritage. The bodyguards protecting the 7 people were a man and a woman. They were dressed simply and neatly in white shirts, light sweaters, black coats, dark trousers, and sturdy leather boots. The 2 bodyguards deliberately didn't hide the outlines made by the gun holsters by their waists. They didn't relax as they inspected the approaching passers-by. Their eyes were sharp and they were composed. 3 servants and 3 bodyguards, Klein asked casually. This is quite an extravagant setup, which means that their employer is a rich person. Instinctively, he made his judgment. Yes, Cleves nodded. Without another word, he quickly turned around and walked towards his employer's family. Klein was stunned. He didn't know why Cleves had specially come to greet him for. After recalling the novels, movies, and television dramas he had seen in his previous life, he gradually understood what Cleves was implying. He's a little wary of me, or should I say of someone who claims to be an adventurer while not looking like someone to mess with. So he introduced himself in advance to indicate his identity and what his job is. It's to tell me to not have any plans regarding his employer's family. In short, you do what you do, I do what I do, and we stay out of each other's business. Is this the tacit understanding between experienced adventurers and veteran bounty hunters? Interesting, Klein chuckled. He carried his suitcase and black cane as he went into the cabin. With the help of his ticket, he found his own room. With a creak, he pushed open the wooden door and walked in. The room wasn't very spacious, just large enough to fit a bed, a table, and a cupboard. There weren't even any chairs. Its greatest advantage was that it came with windows. The wharf's sunlight shone in, illuminating the table and bedside with pure golden spots. A member of the crew mentioned that the washroom and bathroom are for public use, with about 8 rooms sharing one. If someone urgently needs one, then they can provide a wooden toilet, but one must pay the cleaning fee of 3 pence each time. I have to be grateful that after the white agate was renovated, it has many metal pipelines laid. Boilers are burning and hot water is being supplied, providing a relatively convenient way of life. Otherwise, my travels wouldn't be a pleasant one. Klein silently sidefined authorized novels in webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. He quickly took out his necessities and placed them on the table for daily use. When he was tidying up the place, he sat down on the edge of the bed, which wasn't too high, and he listened to the long whistle of the steam whistle. He felt the power that stemmed from steam and machinery contained within it. When the ship began to set sail, Klein looked out the window at the sea and gradually withdrew his thoughts. He began to think about the most important thing that would happen next, the problem of how to act as a faceless. While facing the true creator's descent ritual and the powerful Mr. A, the decision to give up trying to escape and attempt a sabotage act had allowed his potion to be digested a little. Based on this feedback, he gained some new insights into the acting requirements of a faceless. You can disguise yourself into anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. This is the principle which Nimble-Right Master Risago was made to remember. I originally imagined that yourself refers to my original identity, but from the looks of it, that's not the complete picture. What is considered as yourself requires serious thought. Klein leaned forward and bathed in the sunlight as though he was a thinking statue. After a while, he came up with an idea. Does this correspond to the spirit of one's identity, to their true identity deep down? Even back on Earth, Joe Mingrui had worn a lot of facades which formed a social persona. In a sense, this was a big part of what wasn't real. Yes, when I become someone else, I take over their identity. In order to not be discovered, I have to disguise myself socially, which is the same as wearing a different mask. When all the masks are taken down, there will be none left. What kind of yourself does a faceless see at the end of the day? Is this the deeper meaning behind yourself in that principle? When I face my inner thoughts, overcome my fear, and challenge the impossible without reason stemming from society, am I really acting as myself? This is to be explored and verified. At this thought, Klein changed his position, trying to sit more comfortably. Remembering everything that had happened before, he found another question regarding acting. In the underground ruins, I disguised myself as N.C. Zangwill and successfully escaped from my predicament. But why didn't I feel any signs of digesting the potion at all? Does this imply that to digest the faceless potion, a superficial disguise such as that isn't enough? Yes, this is closer to the use of beyonder powers and not acting. What can stimulate the digestion of the potion is a disguise on a deeper level. Is it being a true substitute for a person, becoming that person on a social level? Only when his relatives and friends are unable to find him for a long period of time does it prove that his disguise was a success. In that case, the reason why I feel harmony with the faceless potion is because I had previously disguised myself as Klein Moretti. The first principle of faceless is that you can disguise yourself as anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. The second principle is to have a disguise on a deeper level that fools everyone. But to replace a person and become that person in a societal sense is quite evil just thinking about it. Don't tell me that I have to find those kinds of people who have died in a foreign land but have a wish that has yet to be fulfilled. Klein eased his baffling horror, and he drew up an initial direction for his acting attempts. The higher the sequence, the more difficult it is to act. He sighed, took out his pocket watch, and checked the time. Since it was still too early for lunch and the room was too small and cramped, he decided to take a walk on the deck and enjoy the scenery amidst the sea breeze. After the excitement of the first hour of the voyage, there weren't many people left on deck. Klein walked along the side of the ship, arriving at a secluded area with large shadows. It's a warm, sunny day. Other than the strong winds which might steal my hat, there are no shortcomings. He pressed the half-top hat on his head and leisurely surveyed the cabin, listening to the faint sounds of music coming from inside. Suddenly, he saw the former adventurer, Cleves, busying himself around the corner. In front of him seemed to be a trident, a dagger, and a short knife. Cleves sensed this and raised his head to look at him. Keeping a well-seasoned demeanor, he said in a taciturn manner, "We're all old mates, and we have to maintain them frequently." At this point he added, "There are children in the cabin." "Understood." Klein smiled in response. Cleves lowered his head and continued to busy himself. He casually asked, "You don't seem to have these things with you." "I'm used to using weapons that keep abreast with the times," Klein said vaguely. "And I frequently do maintenance." Cleves silently raised his dagger, looked at it against the sunlight, and said to himself, "At sea, guns alone aren't enough. Pirates will board ships, and there will be a lot of people. After you finish shooting your bullets, you won't have the opportunity to reload again. Although these guys no longer keep abreast with the times, they're still useful enough." Very professional, as expected of a former adventurer, Klein leaned against the side of the boat and said half-jokingly, "If there really are pirates boarding the ship, I'm more likely to choose not to fight back." Cleves turned his head and stared at him for a good 3 seconds before retracting his gaze. Then, as he packed up his things, he said in a low voice, "It seems that you don't need me to remind you. You've already understood the rules of the sea. The bounty hunters who travel the earth are often unable to be adventurers at sea. He skillfully hid the dagger, short knife, and trident under his clothes, which dazzled Klein. "Thank you." Klein smiled and nodded. Without speaking any further, Cleves turned around and returned to the cabin, leaving behind only his broad and deep back. Klein smirked, shook his head, and turned his gaze to the side of the ship. Blue waves gently rose up and down, and silvery white flying fish occasionally leaped out of the water and soared in the air. This fish can fly and swim. They're considered the family of the Lord of Storms by fishermen and sailors, so even if they were caught by nets, they're returned to the sea. Klein was leisurely admiring the surface of the sea under the sunlight, as well as the flying fishes above the surface of the sea. An uncontrollable thought flashed through his mind. I wonder how good their meat is. 493 hunting, honorable arrows. My second question is, how did Sherlock Moriarty escape from the ruins? Icancer's mood was a lot more relaxed than before. The surface of the silver mirror shimmered, rapidly outlining Sherlock Moriarty leaning his back against the wall, his fists clenching and tightening. Then, Icancer Bernard and the surrounding machinery, hive mind deacons and captains, saw the private detective's exaggerated smile before turning around and dashing out with his gun drawn. At this moment, under the influence of the composed scene, they all felt an inexplicable sense of sadness and excitement. The image in the mirror jumped, revealing Sherlock Moriarty wielding his revolver as he shot at the altar to no avail. The scene of those disintegrating bullets caused everyone present to be a little worried. Then, Sherlock Moriarty threw out a brass key, and the altar showed signs of instability due to corruption. With the erupting air blast, Mr. A fell to the ground and Sherlock Moriarty pathetically fled out of the temple building. At this point, the image changed to have the slightly turbid Tussock River as the main background. Sherlock Moriarty and Mr. A floated in the water, looking up into the sky where there were no clouds or fog. Almost instantly, Mr. A became transparent and disappeared, leaving only Sherlock Moriarty looking around in astonishment. "The Church of Evernight's reinforcements," Icancer said with a frown. "Unfortunately, he didn't mention what appeared in his letter. We have no way of guessing. Was he trying to sell this secret for a good price, or was he simply affected by it and lost the relevant memories? Also, his experience of escaping from the underground ruins doesn't show anything. It seems like the corresponding clues have been concealed at the same time." He analyzed it quickly, in procedural sentences, and then without too great a psychological burden, he chose to answer with reciprocity instead of taking a risk. "Arrows doesn't seem to be in the mood to be a prankster today. I can make the most of it." In his self-consolation, Icancer saw bloody words appear on the surface of the mirror. With a skip of his heartbeat, he had a bad premonition, suspecting that Arrows had already recovered to his usual state. The blood-like words wiggled and quickly formed into a question. "Who was the person you gave your all to while trying your best to win the favor of, only to end up being abandoned?" With his head buzzing, Icancer's face drained of all its color before flushing red. The question pierced a deep wound in him while leaving him at a loss as to what to do. If I mention who he is, then his reputation would be ruined before tonight. I've already become a kind of legend in some sense. Icancer swallowed his saliva with great difficulty and bitterly said, "I choose punishment." A bolt of lightning immediately descended. However, it was different from before. It was no longer silvery white and had been dyed with slight green. It hit him right on the head, causing his hair to stand on end and flash with the color of lightning. He shook violently like shaking dice, as though he had been drugged with a hallucinogenic drug. Archbishop Hieramic sighed, closed his eyes, and muttered to himself, "A grade 0 sealed artifact." When Icancer recovered, he looked around and said, "There's one more question. Where did the key that Sherlock Moriarty used to destroy the descent ritual come from? Which one of you is going to use 2111? All the machinery hive mind deacons and captains looked at each other. For a moment, no one responded. The sound of water splashing against the ship's hold seemed to be the only sound left in the world. The sea at night was both noisy and quiet. Klein suddenly woke up and opened his eyes. He saw the wooden ceiling covered with a crimson moon veil. His spiritual intuition told him that there was something happening outside. Is someone having a rendezvous? He tilted his head to listen, vaguely able to hear some unnatural sounds. He sat up, put on his gloves and put on his coat. His eyes turned dark as he took out a gold coin, flipped it, and quickly performed a divination. After receiving no revelations of danger, he took out the revolver under his pillow and put it in his pocket. Find authorized novels in web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. After making the appropriate preparations, Klein opened the door and walked out of the room, following the sound to the upper deck. At this moment at sea, away from the industrial pollution, the crimson moon quietly hung there, mysterious and dreamy. After carefully bypassing a few patrolling crew members, Klein arrived at the area where there was a commotion. He could smell the faint scent of blood. With the help of the moonlight, he looked over and saw the former adventurer, Cleves, squatting to the side of the ship and setting up something. There were 3 people hiding in the shadows of the cabin about a dozen meters away from this gentleman. One of them was a companion of Cleves, the female bodyguard in the black coat, and the remaining 2 were the children of their employer, a girl of 14 or 15 years of age and a young gentleman of no more than 10 years of age. The 2 youngsters wore thick cotton nightgowns and outer coats. It was obvious that they had come out in a hurry. They trembled amidst the chilling night wind, but they still squatted there full of energy and vigor, looking at Cleves with their bright eyes. Playing hide and seek, Klein joked inwardly. He purposely increased the volume of his footsteps, causing Cleves and the others to turn their gaze towards him. "Friend, what happened?" Klein recalled the expressions of some bounty hunters he knew in East Borough. But he still maintained J.M. and Sparrow's unique identity of being cold and sharp. Cleves replied, unperturbed, "A private job, a hunt that came by accident, but one that's worth looking forward to." A hunt. Klein's interest was suddenly piqued. The reason he had named himself J.M. was that it represented the first hunter of a game he had played in his previous life, and it suited his idea of hunting evil at sea. Klein was in no hurry to inquire about the reason. Using his left hand, which wore creeping hunger, he pointed at the shadow next to him with his left finger. "Private job. Doing a private job in front of your employer." Cleves, who was squatting there, glanced at the boy and the girl and said, without changing his tone, "Cecil wasn't careful enough and ended up waking Donna and Denton up. She had no choice but to let them follow." The girl called Donna wrinkled her nose when she heard her name mentioned. She curiously looked up and asked Klein, "Uncle, are you also an adventurer?" "Uncle. Even if it's the me from Earth, I'm at most 10 years older than you." Klein said in amusement, "No, you can't use the word also. Strictly speaking, I'm the only adventurer here. They're just bodyguards right now." He turned to Cleves and said, "Hey, mate, what prey did you discover?" Cleves looked into the faint crimson waters and said, "A murloc." "Murloc, that's a beyonder creature. Even though it's of the lowest grade, it's still quite difficult for ordinary people to deal with them. They would need at least 5 to 6 people and 4 to 5 spears to have a chance." "That's right. The scales on a murloc's body are very hard. Revolvers can only deal a little damage. They need to have a rifle." Klein raised his eyebrows and asked, "What do you plan on doing? And how are you sure it's a murloc?" Cleves pointed to the edge of the ship and said, "There are traces of its body's mucus here. 1 to 2 hours ago, it tried to climb onto the ship to attack the passengers, but the deck was still bustling with activity, and there were lots of sailors and crew." Klein took a few steps forward and saw that there were some traces of green corrosion on the side of the ship. He recalled the information he had come into contact with in Tingen City, and it coincided with the content in the books. He asked with great interest, why must it be one and not a group? He remembered that Murlocs had a tendency to live together. If it's a group, then they'll directly destroy the ship's hull and let everyone sink. Moreover, the area around this channel and the surrounding sea have already been cleared of Murlocs. The Church of Storms really enjoy hunting them, Cleves solemnly explained. That's because Murlocs are probably one of the main ingredients of the Sequence 9 Sailor Potion. Klein stroked the revolver in his pocket and asked with a smile, "Are you confident?" Cleves didn't directly answer him and instead opened a paper bag beside him. Inside the bag were some pig organs still stained with blood. This was the source of the smell of blood that Klein noticed. All Murlocs like this kind of food and are unable to resist its allure. Of course, these monsters love human organs the most, so in many sea legends, it's emphasized to prepare some pig or beef organs from the ship's kitchen or canned organs, Cleves said as he sprinkled some granules. Pepper granules can cause the Murlocs to feel the excitement of smoking marijuana and lose some of their sense of balance. This can last for about a minute, and after that, the Murlocs will be exhausted after the high state of excitement has subsided. He then took out a wooden box from his clothes and placed the dark green paste on the tip of the trident, dagger, and short knife. The mint cream that's popular in Pritz Harbor is a unique sweetener for humans, but in the eyes of the Murlocs, it's a deadly blood toxin. In addition, I borrowed 2 rifles from the sailors. I got an agreement to not disturb this area for 20 minutes, and I spent a sizable sum of money. However, as long as I can successfully kill a Murloc, then I'll be able to reap 10, 20, or even 30 times the cost. As expected of an experienced adventurer, he's exceptionally aware about the weaknesses and problems of his prey. Listening to him speak, I feel like they have a chance of successfully hunting the Murloc, even if they aren't Beyonders. In the face of traps and firearms, low-sequence Beyonders really aren't much stronger than the average person. It's not like there are no low-sequence Beyonders who die in gang wars. However, Murlocs are creatures that seem to wear full-body armor. It's not easy to kill them. They would be injured, but it's not like they can't escape. Klein curiously asked, "You seem to have killed quite a number of Murlocs." Understanding the characteristics of common sea monsters is a prerequisite for an adventurer's survival. Cleves didn't show the joy of being praised as he remained calm and silent. As they conversed, the girl, Donna, and the boy, Denton, squatted in the shadows and listened with relish. They found all of this to be the most interesting thing in the world. "Yes, I also need to brush up on my studies in this area," Klein smiled and said, "So that's how it is. I didn't disturb you, did I?" Cleves pierced a portion of organs on a rod and said with a deep voice, "If you want to participate, take care of Donna and Denton so that Cecil won't be distracted." "Sure." Klein, who wanted to watch from the sidelines, smiled and agreed. 494. A bite of Murloc. The red moon hung high in the sky as Klein walked over to Donna and Denton and squatted down beside them. Cecil, the female comrade of Cleves, let out a sigh of relief. She picked up the rifle on the deck, bent down, and quickly walked in another direction. She opened up a distance of about 10 meters from the peppered pig's organs. "Uncle, is it starting?" The mischievous, freckled teenage girl Donna suddenly felt a little nervous. However, her face was filled with curiosity and anticipation. Klein raised his left index finger to his mouth, motioning for the 2 young ones to be quiet. At times like this, he couldn't help but thank Roselle. It was because of the efforts of this transmigration senior that some of his habitual gestures had become common body language in the northern continent, so it wouldn't lead to misunderstandings. It was said that in the early part of the 5th epoch, This "don't talk" gesture was an insult in loan, but in certain parts of the southern continent, it means "kiss me." Klein's mind was a little distracted for a moment. Donna and Denton didn't dare to say anything else. They just squatted there quietly, watching with rapt attention as Cleves prepared for the battle. The former adventurer picked up a rod and threw the thread with some pig organs hanging from it over the side of the ship. With a splash, the bait entered the water. Calmly dispersing the remaining organs, Cleves wielded his weapon and retreated, step by step, to hide in the shadows opposite Cecile. The two of them formed an angle of about 60 degrees to the side of the ship where the rod was being supported. Leaning his trident and other weapons, he raised his rifle and tried to take in the feeling of aiming. The deck had completely quietened down, leaving only the operating sound of the steam engine and the crashing of waves against the ship. As the minutes ticked by, Donna and Denton couldn't help but switch from squatting to sitting, with their backs against the planks of the cabin, trying to soothe the paralysis in their legs. At that moment, they saw the rod on the side of the boat sink a little. The muffled sound of friction rapidly grew closer and closer. Suddenly, a figure jumped onto the deck. It was a monster bathed in crimson moonlight. Its entire body was covered in dark green scales, and there was a green slime flowing around it. It didn't have much in common with humans. It was like a giant fish that had grown 4 strong limbs, and there was obvious webbing in the cracks of its limbs. The Murloc was more than 1.9 meters tall, with round eyes and gills on its cheeks. It looked like demons from legends, making Donna cover her mouth to prevent herself from screaming. At the same time, she covered the mouth of her brother Denton as well. Good thinking. Klein smiled to himself as he carefully examined the Murloc. Unlike the sailor rampager he had seen before, real Murlocs didn't have human-like brains. They were pure monsters. The Murloc vigilantly scanned the surroundings before squatting down. It picked up the scattered pig organs, quickly stuffed them into its mouth, and produced clear chewing sounds. The light in its mainly white eyes gradually faded as if it had fallen into a dream. "It's of low intellect." Klein shook his head and made his judgment. Bang! Cleves pulled the trigger and a bullet flew out from the rifle. It instantly struck the Murloc's chest, causing its scales to shatter and blood to splatter. "Wah!" The merman let out a cry which sounded like a child, and it threw itself at Cleves, who was hidden in the shadows. It was as fast as a steam train. At this moment, Cecile, who was in another position, opened fire as well. Bang! The bullet from the rifle struck the Murloc's ribs, causing many scales to scatter and the tall figure to stagger. The Murloc, who had eaten the pepper granules, became visibly sluggish. It stopped, unsure of which enemy to attack first, and this gave Cleves and Cecile a chance to calmly reload. They took aim again and pulled their triggers. Bang! Bang! The sprays of blood bloomed in succession. The pain caused the Murloc's eyes to regain its lucidity. It flipped and pounced, dodging the follow-up shots, and closed in on Cleves as if it were unhurt. Cleves methodically put down the rifle in his hand and picked up the trident that was leaning to his side. Instead of dodging, he leaped forward and rolled to the side of the Murloc. The trident in his hand ruthlessly and accurately pierced into the area where the scales on the side of his prey were shattered. The Murloc spun around abruptly, bringing with it a gust of wind. It forcefully threw the trident along with Cleves out, causing the former adventurer to crash onto the deck. The Murloc shook its head, as though sensing an intense discomfort. It didn't attack Cleves and Cecile again, but instead took large strides to the side of the ship in an attempt to jump into the sea. Bang! Cecile's bullet hit it again, creating blood to blossom again, but it still didn't make it become immobile. With 2 steps, the Murloc reached a suitable spot. It bent its knees and prepared to jump up. However, its body was too weak to exert its full strength. The distance it had jumped was obviously not enough, so it could only land on the inner side of the ship. Bang! The Murloc bore the brunt of the damage and tried to flip over the side of the ship. Seeing it almost escaping, Klein took out his revolver. Just then, a loud bang came from another direction. The Murloc's left eye turned into a bloody hole, and one could vaguely see a pale gelatinous substance squirming inside. It wasn't dead yet. It lay on the floor of the deck, trying its best to crawl and get up again. After a few seconds, the poison took effect and it twitched to its death. Klein traced the sound and saw a middle-aged man step out of the shadows on the other side of the cabin. The middle-aged man was wearing a thick, dark red coat and white slacks. He was wearing the standard ship-shaped hat of this era. He was holding an iron-colored musket that was a relic of the times as white smoke billowed out of its thick black muzzle. Klein had heard the attendant introduce the man before, and he knew the man. He was the captain of the White Agate, Elend Cag. With obvious wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, his forehead, and the corners of his mouth, Elend walked towards Cleves and said with a smile, "As a captain, I must ensure that no accidents happen. Forgive me for watching by the side all this time." Cleves had already stood up. He didn't betray his emotions. "This is your ship. According to convention, you have the right to share in the spoils." Elend turned his head to look at Klein and others and said with a smile, "The next resupply of water and food is in 2 days' time. You'll have to think of a way to preserve the Murloc's corpse. How about this? Sell it to me at a cheaper price. The difference is the reward I deserve. This is the best solution." Cleves and Cecil exchanged glances and agreed to Elend's request. "For 130 pounds, it's all yours. The Murloc Beyonder ingredient has a market price of 150 to 200 pounds. Considering the other parts with spirituality, 130 pounds is indeed cheap. However, this is the only thing Cleves and Cecil can do. This is Elend's ship, and he had a large group of armed sailors and crew to help him. If the negotiations break down, they could sink everyone here into the sea within minutes, of course. That's under the premise that I don't involve myself. Yes, it can be seen that Cleves and Cecil aren't Beyonders, at least not Beyonders of the combat and shooting domains. As for Elend, I find it suspect." Klein stood up and listened to the deal. "No, you seem to have misunderstood something. I'm not threatening you. 150 pounds, that's a fair price." Elend Cag called for a sailor and gave him the key to the safe. "You are the just Elend." Only then did Cecil seem to recall his title on the sea. Elend laughed and said, "Yes. Find authorized novels in Webnovel Faster Updates. Better experience, please click for visiting." At this moment, Donna and Denton, stunned by the intense battle and the living monster, jumped to their feet and ran over to the Murloc in excitement and fear. Is it really dead?" Donna kicked the Murloc's body with her toe. Then she jumped away and hid behind her younger brother as if she were afraid it would revive. "It really is a monster." Denton took a deep breath and opened his eyes wide. "There are many monsters at sea. Apart from having 4 limbs and being able to stand, Murlocs have no similarities to humans." Elend smiled gently. He squatted down and took out a knife, slicing the cheek beneath the Murloc's eye, revealing white, tender skin that was tainted with some red. The most delicious part of a Murloc's body is suitable for eating it raw. Elend carefully sliced a piece of flesh and handed it to Donna. "You remind me of my daughter. Unfortunately, she's grown up and has a family of her own." I don't dare to eat it," Donna said, looking at the thin sliver of flesh held at the tip of the knife. "Ha ha, which one of you wants to try?" Elend laughed and looked around. After confirming that there were no warnings from his spiritual intuition, Klein nodded. "Very curious." Elend immediately handed him the knife. "Give it a try. On land, even nobles may not necessarily have a chance to eat it. These Murlocs are fish monsters. They can be understood as a mutated type of fish." He was trying to dispel the siblings' fears. Klein wanted to ask if there was any wasabi, soy sauce, or any other condiments, but seeing that the other party didn't mention it, he was afraid to appear ignorant. He took the knife, bit into the bloody flesh and swallowed it. It was a feeling of flesh that instantly melted in his mouth. The taste of blood was very faint, giving it an appropriate salty taste. It perfectly set off the fresh and sweet taste of the meat. Klein chewed twice, taking in the deliciousness of the tenderness and freshness of the fish meat. It was the first time in his life that he was experiencing something like that. Excellent. He wasn't stingy with his praises as he gave a thumbs up. Donna watched the whole thing with curiosity, suddenly interested in the flesh on the murloc's cheek. This overwhelmed her fear and disgust, and she suggested the idea of trying. Ellen fulfilled her request and smiled as he watched her tightly close her eyes as her face scrunched into a grimace as she bit into the meat. Donna's expression gradually relaxed, and she quickly opened her eyes. She excitedly praised, "An indescribable delicacy." She spurred things into action as Denton, Cecile, and the others shared the little chunk of cheek meat. Eating it satisfied them, but it also made them dissatisfied. They were satisfied with the taste, but were dissatisfied with the quantity. Seeing that Ellen had eaten the last piece, Cleves pointed at the murloc's body and said, "The meat around the ribs is suitable for frying, while the belly meat should be roasted. The other parts taste bad." "I share your thoughts," Ellen said with a chuckle. "I'll have the chef prepare it immediately. On such a night, we should enjoy good food and wine together and exchange the legends at sea. It's a very enjoyable matter. I'm looking forward to it, however. Why did a perfectly fine hunt turn into a delicacy exchange?" Klein swallowed his saliva. 495 Legend of Treasure above the deck. There was an extra layer of asbestos beneath the grill to prevent the coal sparks from being blown out by the wind and scorching the surface of the ship. The fat cook, wearing an apron and a tall white hat invented by Roselle, used a fine brush to constantly apply a seasoning created from a secret recipe: basil, fennel, sea salt, pepper, and lemon juice to the long, white strips of fish, and frequently flipped them over to ensure that both sides were evenly heated. The flesh of the murloc's belly was fatty, dripping with drops of oil and causing the coal beneath the iron mesh to sizzle and flare up. An enticing aroma began to fill the air, and Klein inhaled again and again. In front of him was a round table and a chair. On top of the table was a unique-looking bottle of wine. The wine was golden red in color and seemed slightly sticky as it swirled about. Sonia blood wine is brewed from the sugarwood juice found in the surrounding areas of Golden Spring. It tastes like thin honey mixed with blood. It's sweet and smooth, but it's very easy to get drunk on. If you fancy any lady and want to treat her to a drink, you can consider this. It will make her drink more without realizing it. Haha, that's under the premise that you're able to handle the amount of alcohol she's drinking. Noticing Klein's scrutiny, Captain Ellen Cagg introduced in a half-joking manner. As expected of a former bosun, he's accomplished when it comes to self-deprecation. Klein sat down and maintained a cold attitude as he asked, "A qualified adventurer wouldn't indulge in alcohol." Cleves, who was beside him, nodded. "Only when they return home will adventurers allow themselves to drink." "What a pity." Ellen turned to look at Donna and Denton, who were staring curiously at the blood wine. He laughed and said, "This isn't something that underage children should experience." "I've had it before. It tastes really good," Donna retorted immediately. It's just that I fell asleep without realizing it and slept an entire afternoon." "I remember that you drank 2 cups that time," the little gentleman, Denton, said enviously. Ellen didn't satisfy their cravings and instead ordered a cup of sweet iced tea for each of the siblings and casually explained, "There are a lot of Southerners on this ship." Denton retracted his disappointed gaze and looked at the murloc, which had its valuable materials taken away. He said rather innocently, Actually, it's not that scary. It's just a bigger, uglier fish with 4 limbs." Donna shot a glance at her younger brother. "Congratulations, you finally recognized the essence of it." She then looked eagerly at Cleves and Elend. Uncle, are there many of these monsters in the sea? Murlocs didn't possess beyonder powers which were beyond one's imagination. In the eyes of ordinary people, they were akin to ferocious beasts at sea or a living example of legendary monsters. Ellen chuckled and said, "No, in the main sea route and the surrounding seas there are very few monsters like this. They've been cleared out a long time ago. You must be lucky enough to meet a Murloc. Think about it, if I can often kill monsters worth 200 pounds or more, then I certainly wouldn't be the captain of a passenger ship. I'd organize my own hunting boat to chase down these gold pounds." That makes a lot of sense. Klein secretly cheered him on. According to his observation, the beyonder ingredient from a Murloc was its bladder. That azure aqueous light made one feel like they were looking at a gem. Cleves raised the black tea which a sailor had just delivered. He first smelled it before taking a sip. Only by leaving the main sea route and going deep into the ocean, which is often shrouded in fog or storms, will there be a good chance of encountering such monsters, but that would be very dangerous. Apart from scaly Murlocs who can climb, there are also legends at sea of Nagas that have the upper body of a human while their bottom half is that of a snake. They have 6 arms and are very agile. Find authorized novels in Webnovel Faster Updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. Elend continued on the topic. There are also giant octopuses which can spit out juices that can corrode a lot of people, terrifying sea monsters that can flip a boat with a gentle blow, mermaids with intoxicating songs that make one unwilling to leave, blue giant dragons that can produce lightning, giant birds with wings that can cause hurricanes. Heh, I've never seen any of these before. They're all legends of the sea, and no one knows whether they're real or fake. Mermaids. Klein's expression didn't change. "Very interesting," Donna exclaimed, fascinated with a look of longing. Denton looked around, and seeing that Klein hadn't spoken, he curiously asked, "Uncle, you're an adventurer too. Have you seen such monsters before?" Klein was stunned for a moment and then gave a faint smile. "Once. Back then there were 5 of us and we chanced upon one, a single Murloc. After an intense fight we finally finished it." This was a real experience of his in Tingen City. It was also his first encounter with an official beyonder who had lost control. At that time, he and old Neil had helped to eliminate a mutated sailor at the request of Swain, the old owner of the Evil Dragon Bar. Thinking of this, Klein felt nostalgic and wistful. The cold and sharp expression on his face couldn't help but soften significantly. 5 people. While asking, Donna secretly counted the number of people who had been involved in the battle. 1, 2, 3. She discovered that only 3 people had taken action to kill the Murloc. Without waiting for Klein's response, Ellen said with a hint of surprise, "A chance encounter." "Yes," Klein answered frankly. "Were there any casualties?" Ellen pressed. Klein shook his head. "A few minor injuries, a chance encounter, and you only took 5 people to finish a Murloc. All of you are very powerful." Cleves gave his own evaluation. His companion, Cecile, nodded to express her astonishment. The battle that had happened just now was brief and quick, and the Murloc seemed easy and vulnerable, but she and Cleves both knew very well that without the pre-prepared bait, the hallucinatory effects of the pepper granules and the subsequent fatigue, the Murloc's fatal weakness of mint cream, and the 2 borrowed rifles, it was impossible to imagine how many people would die in order to kill a Murloc. Indeed, very powerful. Ellen looked thoughtfully at Klein. "It was a team formed of 4 sequence 9s and a sequence 8, Klein said with a half smile and a half sigh. "At that time, I was still very young and I didn't even have any experience in combat. I was purely support." "Uncle, you're still very young." Donna nodded her head vigorously. "I like what you said." Klein keenly noticed that Captain Elend had relaxed a lot from what he had just said. At this moment, several crew members had brought over a large ceramic plate. On top of it were pieces of meat that had been fried to a golden hue. The basil leaves were sprinkled with color, and a captivating fragrance assaulted their noses. Elend raised his glass of Sonya blood wine and offered a toast. To a beautiful night. May the storm be with us. To a beautiful night. Donna and Denton cheered and sipped their sweet iced tea. Klein chose to clink glasses with a cup of black tea. He forked a piece of meat from the murloc's ribs, finding it firm and without fat. However, after absorbing the vegetable oil, its flaw of being too dry was remedied. As he chewed, it emanated an limitlessly chewy consistency and fragrance. It's really inferior to the cheek meat, but it's already good enough. It's better than all the fish I've eaten while in Backlund and Pritz Harbor, Klein praised in satisfaction. Ellen put down the knife and fork in his hands, took a sip of Sonya blood wine and sighed at the topic. At sea, the greatest danger doesn't stem from the monsters but those pirates. They helm their ships, going wherever they please. No one can defend against them in advance. "Uncle Captain, will we encounter pirates?" Denton asked with concern as he swallowed the fried fish. Elend laughed. The route to the Rörsted archipelago is the safest in the world, with colonial islands en route every 2 to 3 days, allowing us to dock. The route is also patrolled by ships from the Imperial Navy and the Church of Storms. Even if pirates come wandering here, they wouldn't do anything too excessive. After seeing our cannons, they would at most extort some compensation. Seeing that the 2 underage children had calmed down, Elend added, "But from the south of the Rörsted archipelago, or as we continue east, we'll have to rely on the Lord's blessing. Many pirates are active in these areas, playing hide and seek with the ships of the Navy and Church. If we're lucky, we'll be able to reach the southern continent and every destination very smoothly. But if we aren't lucky, we'll encounter some relatively powerful pirates, including the fleet of the 7 pirate admirals and even the 4 kings. However, you don't have to be too worried. Ever since Nast became the king of the 5 seas and enacted the rules of sea passage, most pirates will only rob you clean of your wealth, without doing anything too overboard. Around this area, we're most afraid of encountering the captain of the Black Tulip, Admiral Hell Ludwell. He'll get his subordinates to kill everyone on board, throwing the innocents into hell. Next would be Admiral of Blood Center. He loves blood, and he allows his subordinates to partake in heinous acts. Many girls have suffered under them before being sold to different islands. Donna trembled as she subconsciously changed the topic. I heard that there are a lot of treasures at sea. There are legends of treasures, but most of them are fake. Ellen glanced at Cleves and said, "There are 6 stories which are the most famous. Ranked first is the Death's Key. Rumor has it that at the end of the 4th epoch, Death, who had caused the Pale disaster, was attacked by the 7 gods and ended up perishing. He attempted to return to the southern continent and created a raging stormy wave, an impassable barrier. It completely obstructed the sea route between the northern and southern continents. This is the origin legend of the Berserk Sea. However, he eventually failed to return to the southern continent and ended up vanishing in the sea." When he said this, Ellen sighed with pangs of yearning. It's said that in some secret place in the Berserk Sea, the treasure left behind by Death is waiting for the person holding the specific key to find it and open it, but no one knows what the key looks like, or where it will appear. Ranked second is the Fountain of Unaging. It's deep in the Sonya Sea. Rumor has it that one of the 4 kings, King of Immortality, Agalido, had drunk the waters of the Fountain of Unaging. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com 496, The Promising Sea, Fountain of Unaging. Will you really gain eternal youth if you drink it? Donna widened her eyes and asked curiously. She didn't have any feelings of anticipation because she was still young enough. Ellen didn't answer at once, and instead he forked a piece of fried Murloc rib meat, tore into it in 2 bites, and took a sip of Sonya wine. The sweet and smooth taste has completely nullified the cloyed taste of fried oil. His eyes were half closed, and he looked like a gourmet. After pondering for a few seconds, he slowly answered Donna's question. I don't know if there's a fountain of unaging, nor am I certain if the king of immortality, Agalito, drank its waters. I only know one thing, and that is that when I was very young, I heard the legend of this pirate king. It's just like how King of the Five Seas, Nast, seems to live forever. Their beards must be very long, extending beyond than their chests. Denton gave his opinion. In fact, the King of the Five Seas, Nast, has a beard that only reaches below his neck. He sits on the deck, draped in a black splendid robe with silver ends. He wears a crown that's 2 times taller than his head and overlooks everything like a deity. Ellen's tone gradually lowered as though his memories had entered a quagmire, and he was unable to extricate himself. Uncle Captain, have you ever met the King of the Five Seas? Donna asked excitedly. This was the most legendary pirate. His name traveled through the sea, and even the children of the port cities knew his name. Whole generations of people grew up listening to stories about him. In a sense, many people view Nast as the true pirate king. I remember one of the conditions for advancement for Dark Emperor is to equate one's name with Emperor, entrenching it deep in the hearts of the people. Is this an early or simplified version of an attempt? I wonder what sequence the King of the Five Seas is at now. Although Klein was focused on sampling the Murloc meat, his mind whirled as a result of the group's discussion. Faced with Donna's question, Ellen said with a sigh, "At that time, I was still very young and serving on the William V. Once, our fleet tried to cross the Strait of Calamity in the Berserk Sea and encountered the Dark Emperor's ship there. In those few minutes, everyone, including the fleet captain, lost the will to fight. Fortunately, Nast didn't give the order to attack us." "Very cool," the boy Denton cheered, his eyes shining. Ellen didn't continue the topic. He smiled and said, "As for King of Immortality, Agalito, I've never met him in real life. I only know that his bounty notice depicts a pale middle-aged man." "How pale?" "Let me give an example you can understand. It's like he's been dead for some time, a corpse which is just beginning to rot." When Donna and Denton heard this analogy, they subconsciously looked at the badly mutilated Murloc's corpse and involuntarily quivered their throats. Of course, the most important thing in a bounty notice isn't the looks, it's the bounty reward. In loan alone, Agalito is worth 100,000 pounds, and his bounty is the lowest among the 4 kings. Ellen diverted the topic and said, "Let's continue the stories about treasure. Ranked 3rd is the inheritance of the Solomon Empire. In the 4th epoch, when that massive empire was dissolved and destroyed, the royalty brought treasures that even the gods would be jealous of onto a ship. They steered it deep into the Fog Sea, awaiting the opportunity to rebuild their dynasty. However, 500 years passed, 1,000 years passed, and 1,500 years passed, but it ultimately didn't appear. Rumor has it that the King of the Five Seas, Nast, inherited parts of the Solomon Empire's inheritance. No one knows if he's a descendant of the real Dark Emperor," Cecil added with interest. "Fog Sea, western shore of the northern continent." Donna thought back to her geography. "Right," Cleves responded simply. West of the northern continent was the Fog Sea. To its east was the Sonya Sea, south was the Berserk Sea, and north was the North Sea. The east and west sides of the southern continent were similar to the northern continent, while south of it was the Polar Sea. Together, they formed the 5 Seas. The lone kingdom was backed by the Hornisus mountain range and the inland Midseashire. Its eastern face was the Sonya Sea, and it stretched south to Daisy Bay. It occupied several of the excellent entrances to the Berserk Sea, but it didn't involve the Fog Sea. "Is that so?" Donna didn't have much interest in the faraway treasure, so she switched focus and asked, "What about the fourth treasure?" "It belongs to the last empire of the fourth epoch, Trunsost. Rumor has it that they built a huge ship the size of a city, and they transferred all their treasures onto it. Funny enough, their escape was of no use. Although the predetermined passengers and crew didn't fail to arrive at the port in time, none of them survived. However, that ship vanished by itself. Up to this day, people often claim to see a gigantic ship sail by them silently in a foggy night. It's been called the Spectre Empire, and it appears across the Sanya Sea. Heh, this is the conclusion from all those stories." Elend looked up at the red moon hanging high in the sky as he said with a tone of mockery, without any disguise of his longing, "Perhaps we will see it pass us by tomorrow night." "No, tonight." Donna thought with anticipation and excitement. Klein finished up the rest of his food, drank his black tea, and listened with interest to what Ellen had to say about the rest of the treasures. "The fifth is the lost city of Newlands. Rumor has it that at the bottom of the Fog Sea, there's a civilization with intelligent creatures. Around that patch of sea, seafarers and adventurers often find special items which all point to the Newlands of ancient times. However, the members of this civilization have yet to appear. It's like it has been lost to this world." Ellen drank the remaining of his Sanya blood wine and said, "That is an inheritance left behind by a civilization. The magnitude of its wealth is absolutely unimaginable." After pausing for 2 seconds, Ellen put down his glass and laughed. "In fact, the treasure I look forward to the most is one which has more accounts than legends, the sunken laurel. More than a century ago, it carried gold, jewelry, and various valuable items that the kingdom obtained from East Balam. As it steered away from the sea route, it sunk in an unknown area somewhere between the Berserk Sea and Sanya Sea. It hasn't been found to this day. It's said that the items on board are worth millions of pounds. Millions of pounds." The number caused Donna to blurt out in astonishment. As a merchant's daughter who had been educated for many years, she had a vague understanding as to what this number represented. In Lone, a millionaire was a genuinely rich person, second only to the top noble families and tycoons. Millions of pounds. As a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, a major shareholder in the Coim Company, Mrs. Mary, who allowed me to join the Quelog Club for free, is only worth a few £100,000, and even so, she's rich enough even in the circle of aristocrats and merchants. She's a popular divorced lady, and there are even aristocratic children who propose to her. Klein quickly found a target for comparison. Ellen sighed with a smile. "If I can find the sunken laurel, then I don't have to be a captain anymore. I'll head to Backland and become a philanthropist. I'll purchase land and donate to political parties and get a hereditary aristocratic title. I've heard Talon mention before that a baronet costs about £300,000 and about £800,000 for a baron. If you manage to get your hands on the treasure, the titles of Viscount and even Earl is something within the limits of imagination, millions of pounds." Klein helped Ellen perfect his plan. "If it were me, I wouldn't do that. I'll buy a huge manor." Cecile also began to imagine her life after finding the treasure. "I want to hire many servants and helpers, plant large tracts of wheat, build vineyards, make wine for myself. Also, I want to have a room where I can sunbathe, have leisurely moving cows, sheep, and horses, and have bread from my own mill, just like a beautiful picturesque scene." Ellen laughed when he heard that. "Ma'am, do you know how much a manor like this is worth?" "No, I don't." Cecile shook her head. "Find authorized novels in web novel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. It's only a few £1,000. If you find the sunken laurel, you can buy 1,000 of those manors." Ellen used exact numbers to illustrate the value of the treasure. 1,000 manors. Cecile couldn't help but raise her cup and drink a mouthful of black tea. Before this, she had known that several £1,000,000 was a lot of money, but she hadn't expected it to be this much. In order to alleviate the shock in her heart, she looked at Cleves and said, "Boss, if you find the sunken laurel, what do you plan on buying? No, what sort of life do you wish to have?" Cleves fell silent for a moment before saying, "Return home. I'll hug my wife and children, telling them that I no longer need to go on an adventure out at sea again." "Not a bad guy," Klein nodded slightly. Donna looked at him curiously. "Uncle Adventurer, what about you?" Klein replied expressionlessly. "Tell myself not to sleep anymore. Hurry up and wake up." Donna spat out the sweet iced tea she just drunk, but fortunately, the fried fish on the table had already been eaten. At this moment, Klein sighed inwardly. "Even though I know it's basically impossible to find the treasure, otherwise the various churches would have already done it with all the powerhouses they have. But when discussing such topics, I couldn't help but get excited. This is the charm of treasure. Even if it was just a legend, it can attract many adventurers." Donna wiped her mouth and sat down like a lady, as though she wasn't the one who had lost her composure. The little boy, Denton, asked, still eager for more, "Are there any other legends of treasure?" Ellen looked at Cleves, indicating that he should answer. Cleves calmly drank a mouthful of black tea and said in a deep voice, "There are countless treasures at sea. The hidden lands of the elves, the missing pirate ships in the depths of the fog, the underwater city sealed with powerful monsters, the last secret trove of Emperor Roselle, and so on." Ah. The Emperor had already reached the level of leaving treasures and legends for others. If it's true, would there be cards of blasphemy in it? How many would there be? The legend of the Key of Death might help Mr. Azek regain more of his memories. Klein thought with curiosity and anticipation. 497. The Wall of Rewards. After the talk about the legends of treasures that had inspired generations of adventurers to go to sea came to an end, the cook had also finished roasting the flesh of the murloc's belly. They were white after being cooked, charred a little black, and covered with tiny brown particles that glistened with a moist, oily glow. The repeated smearing of seasonings had already seeped into the texture of the meat, effusing it with a tantalizing visual effect. "Daisy grilled fish, it's different from how you usually eat it." Ellen pointed at the white porcelain plate the cook lowered. Donna held her fork and knife and eagerly said, "I love honey-roasted fish, but this is also very appetizing." Honey-roasted fish, how much honey would that take? If I have a chance to try it, the taste should be pretty good. Klein allowed his imagination to run wild. With a chef, there was no need for them to serve themselves. They could only look on expectantly as pieces of fish were sliced, placed on different plates, and served in front of them. Klein was very serious when it came to tasting delicacies, so he was in no hurry to deal with the fish. Instead, he took a sip of black tea and used the slightly sour liquid to clear his mouth of any remaining flavors. After doing all of this, he forked a piece of fish and stuffed it into his mouth. In a split second, he felt the slightly stimulating flavors of fennel, basil, and other spices. They were sufficient enough to help him open up one taste bud after another. Immediately after, the delicious juices of the meat, the slightly astringent taste of the sea salt, and the refreshing, sour and sweet taste of lemon all burst out at the same time, filling his oral cavity and making his mouth water. As he chewed, the last bit of the fish meat's stubbornness was broken off one by one after having its fat roasted out of it, fully presenting the splendor of the meat, as well as its faint sweetness. Swallowing the fish in his mouth, Klein recalled a delicacy program he had watched in his previous life, and chose the evaluation line that matched what he just felt. "The layered flavors are very clear, excellent." "Ha ha, your tone and words make you sound like a gourmet," Ellen joked. Donna waved her fork and echoed, "Uncle, Perhaps you should write a column in the newspaper about different restaurants and different cuisines. Why didn't I think of this idea? This is a good job that can earn me money, as well as allowing me to taste delicacies. The only problem is that an obese man can't be a flexible clown use the great art of spewing vomit. What a waste of food. Klein seriously considered Donna's suggestion. To a beautiful night. When there was very little food left, Elland poured himself some more of the Sonia blood wine and raised his glass with a ruddy face. Klein and the others echoed in similarly good moods. To a beautiful night. They drank the rest of the liquids from their glasses and watched the waiter clear the table and clean the deck. They talked for a while more amidst the cold wind, talking about the mermaids that Donna was most interested in. Cleves told the young lady that, in some legends, mermaids were also called sirens, and they used their songs to confuse humans not for entertainment but for hunting. Aside from the possibility of encountering these creatures on the sea route from the Gargas archipelago to the depths of the Sonia Sea, there was a certain chance of discovering it in dangerous seas that haven't been explored by humans. However, all of this stemmed from the drunken boasting of certain pirates, and they all avoided the question of how they escaped from the mermaid's songs, which made it highly suspicious. No matter what, this at least points me in a possible direction. Klein took note of what they had discussed. Donna, Denton, it's time to go back. You'll have to get up early tomorrow and have breakfast with your parents. Cecile looked at the moon's position. Fine. Donna stood up reluctantly. Find authorized novels in WebNovel Faster Updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. Denton hurriedly asked, do I have a chance at becoming an adventurer? His mind had been captivated by the previous hunt and the legends. Cleves walked to his side, patted his shoulder, and said, before you ask this question, you need at least 5 years of combat training and studying. I think your father will hire a good tutor for you. Yeah. Denton's eyes lit up, and he nodded vigorously. After 5 years, the adult you probably won't want to be an adventurer who can find himself buried at the bottom of the sea at any time. Cleves' handling of the situation was very shrewd. He didn't immediately refuse him, but rather he gave him hope and let time wash away his interest. This prevents the child from becoming suddenly rebellious. Regardless, mastering a fighting technique is always beneficial for anyone. Klein put his hands in his pockets and thought with appreciation. On the way back to the interior of the cabin, Cleves handed 2 5-pound notes to Klein. Your payment. He had just received £150 from Ellen's purchase of the whole Murloc. I didn't do anything, Klein instinctively refused. Cleves glanced at him with his pale blue eyes and said in a low voice, you freed up Cecile and took good care of the children. Took good care of the children. Klein was somewhat amused, but he finally took the 2 bills and drew a triangle on his chest. You're more generous than I thought. Thank you. He stopped declining because he suddenly figured out something. If he hadn't accepted the £10, then in the eyes of a veteran adventurer like Cleves, it would appear as though he was dissatisfied with the price and was attempting to get more, making it possible that he would attack them at any time. Among self-proclaimed adventurers, there was definitely no lack of greedy madmen. Seeing Jam and Sparrow pocket the money, Cleves looked away and said flatly, this is a rule of the sea. Without another word, he followed Cecile, Donna, and company into the cabin. If I could get such rewards with every single mission and job of this difficulty, then I would have long made a fortune with my job as a private detective. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and turned his head to look at the red moon hanging high in the sky. It still shone quietly and gently in the night. Legends of the sea, different monsters. I've finally found the slight feeling of being an adventurer. Klein turned around and walked to the edge of the ship. Bathing in the crimson veil, he admired the waves that were growing darker. Gradually, his mood settled as he walked out bit by bit from the gloom of Backland's great smog. The cold, damp wind slapped his face, and the vast, endless ocean caught his eye, opening up his heart. For a moment, Klein felt the urge to sing, but when he opened his mouth, he found that he couldn't remember the corresponding modern verses. I can't just end up saying, "Oh, see, you're all water." The Emperor's Savant sequence is really well suited to doing such things. When I have the time, I should read through his poems so as to not look like illiterate, Klein lampooned as he looked at the red moon and the ocean before sighing. What a beautiful night. After an accidental episode of getting lost, the exploratory team returned to the City of Silver. Looking at the wall's cracks filled with weeds, Derek found himself in a trance, as if he had been gone for many years. Diagonally behind him, Demon Hunter Collins' eyes suddenly wore a lost look as he raised his hand to press on his right temple. The rest of the team members were filled with joy and relief from the bottom of their hearts. After a difficult exploration, having a home waiting for them was the happiest thing in their hearts. Collins' gaze returned to normal as he turned his head to the side and looked diagonally ahead. Backlund, the White family. After some thought, the confident Imlin came up to his parents and asked, "If I wanted to delve into the history of us Sanguine, who would I look for? If I were to ask about the City of Silver directly, it's very likely that I'll be exposed for being problematic. Although I'm not afraid and very calm for the ancestor and in order to save the entire Sanguine race, I have no choice but to hide it. I've always been interested in the history of Sanguine. I've collected a lot of information, and father and mother know that, so I wouldn't be suspected in any way. This excuse is perfect." Imlin praised himself inwardly. He resembled his father to a certain extent. He wore gold-rimmed glasses that made him look very professional. The gentleman who had gotten his doctorate in medicine put down the thick anatomy book in his hands, nudged his glasses, and said, "No one in Backlund knows more than Lord Nibs. If I dared to seek Lord Nibs, I would have long done so." Emlyn thought of Mr. Fool's description of him being a messiah that had to bear the burden of a secret while being misunderstood, as he pressed with a solemn expression, "Aside from Lord Nibs. He's sleeping underground, so it's not convenient for him to be disturbed." Emlyn's father pulled up the collar of his thick cotton pajamas and thought for a moment. Waymondy, he always thinks of himself as a historian. Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. "I wish to visit him." Woo! The whistle sounded and the white agate sailed into Daymere Harbor. It would replenish fresh food and water on the colonial island and set sail again the next morning. After hunting the Murloc, Klein spent the next 2 days of what could be described as a leisurely or boring life. He was completely bored by the scenery of the sea, and he decided to head to the harbor's bar to look around that very night, hoping to get more information on mermaids and inspiration for acting. If I were to come across a pirate whose hands are stained with blood on shore, I wouldn't mind teaching him a lesson. There are still souls waiting to be released from creeping hunger. Klein's forehead sweated as he equipped himself with all his mystical items as he left his cabin before heading down to the harbor. During this process, he met Donna, Cleves, and the others. They seemed to be heading over to a port restaurant to taste Daymere's most famous cured meat. Donna and Denton greeted the adventurer, whom they had just gotten to know, without their parents noticing, and seemed curious as to where he was going. Klein smiled back, pulled up his collar, and, following the directions of the sign, found the nearest bar. Flying Fish and Wine. Klein looked at the signboard and saw that the outside of the bar was plastered with bounty notices. Among them were the 800,000 pounds belonging to the King of the Five Seas, and more than 100 pounds for the common pirate captain. This formed a unique landscape that ranged from the highest to the lowest. "It's all money." Klein stood on the spot and looked at it for a long time. He withdrew his gaze, pushed open the door, and entered the bar, only to find that it was abnormally quiet. It didn't have the din that such places came equipped with. What happened? Klein looked around and saw Captain Elland in a dark red coat sitting at the bar, as well as two large men in the middle of the room, facing each other. 498 persona. The standoff was between a brawny man in a blue-white striped shirt, a symbol of the Navy. Despite the weather being at near zero temperatures, he had his arms bare. He held a dagger against the throat of the man opposite him, but his glabella was being pointed at by an ancient musket, one which could have been placed in a museum. The musket's owner was also more than 1.8 meters tall, with strong muscles and an oily face. He had shaved his hair, and with a sea eagle tattoo, he cursed, "Dodge T Navy sailor. No one in Daymere Harbor would dare slander me as a pirate's informant." The Navy sailor didn't yield to him, and both sides fully illustrated the rich profanities of the sea. Klein observed for a few seconds. Then he walked around the edge to Captain Elland, who had a straight sword at his waist and a hidden musket on his body. He asked in a calm and casual manner, "What happened?" "A quarrel between two drunkards. In Daymere Harbor and in the surrounding waters, there's always been such rumors that Sea Eagle Logan is in service of the master of the Black Tulip." The Navy sailor had mentioned this a moment ago, and Sea Eagle just happened to hear that. The master of the Black Tulip, isn't that Admiral Hell Ludwell? Klein turned and sat down on the high stool in front of the bar counter. He tapped the wooden countertop. "1 glass of Southville beer, 6 pence. A bronze-skinned bartender with pearly white teeth wiped the cups as he said with zero passion, "When it comes to continental specialties, the prices are much higher than Backlund and Tingen." Klein fished out a handful of copper pence, counted 6 pence and gave it to him. At this moment, Logan and the Navy sailor were stopped by the bar's bouncer. After they each spoke harshly to each other, they retreated to different corners. Perhaps it was due to him losing his dignity. The Navy sailor hurriedly left after about 10 seconds. The atmosphere in the bar became lively once again. "Want to play some cards?" Captain Elland pointed to the stairs by the side of the bar. "No." Klein's main purpose for coming was to gather information. Elland subconsciously wanted to pat him on the shoulder, but his cold and sharp demeanor stopped him. He could only pull back his hand and pretend to adjust his dark red coat and remind him, "Don't get the women here." Klein nodded, picked up the glass of Southville beer and took a swig. "Also, don't trust anyone here. Only a small portion of what they say is true." Elland carried his Lanty-proof and stepped onto the stairs that led to the second floor. Klein turned his head to glance at him and asked without a change in expression, "Including you?" "Perhaps." Elland was taken aback at first before he laughed out loud. "At least my reminder just now was real. Oh, and me being a man is true as well." "Not necessarily. There's a potion called witch in this world." Klein looked away, drinking slowly and listening to the surrounding drinkers boasting. 2 or 3 minutes later, a short, thin man sat down next to Klein with his drink. "Mate, you look like an adventurer." He tilted his head and smiled. The man who greeted him had black hair, blue eyes, and aged facial features. His temperament was rather wretched. "You could say that," Klein replied coldly. "I can tell you're a hunter that chases after bounties and riches." The short man looked around and lowered his head, suppressing his voice while he said, "Have you heard of the Spectre Empire?" "I've heard of Amway, and I've also heard of the Father in Heaven and the Messiah being sealed at the bottom of the sea using the power of Faceless." Klein sent out a signal not to approach him. "Yes, a huge, ancient ghost ship full of treasures. We have clues to it," the short man said in an infectious tone. "We found some information about where it will appear next. We don't want the pirates or the Navy to benefit from it, and we don't want to be robbed of our wealth, so we've decided to hire our own armed merchant ships to wait in that area, which would probably cost about £1,000. I've already found 15 companions and raised £720. Are you interested in participating?" Without waiting for Klein to speak, he fumbled for a stack of brownish-yellow letters. "I know you won't believe it so easily." In fact, no one will, but after the 15 friends who read through this information, all of them decided to join in on our plan. Do I have such a gullible face? Or would any bumpkin end up in this situation without slipping away from this sort of thing? While Klein was considering whether to appraise the letters from the corner of his eye, he saw that Sea Eagle Logan, who was previously squabbling, was walking towards him. "Woody, you're trying to scam someone again. You damn sewer rat." Logan picked up the short man and threw him into the open space in the middle of the bar, where he landed on the ground, sprawling. The muscular man, with the bluish-green tattoo on his head, sat in the same position as Woody and guffawed. "Sorry, these are the rats of our Daymere Harbor. They always do things that ruin our reputation. In fact, we're all very friendly. If you have anything you want to ask about, don't hesitate to ask me. Heh heh, don't believe what they say about me. I'm an upright person and I have nothing to do with Admiral Hell." The more you emphasize that, the more suspicious it becomes. Klein's expression didn't change as he calmly said, "I want to know the latest rumors." "No problem." Sea Eagle Logan slammed the bar top and said to the bartender, "Give me a plate of special cured meat. I'll be treating this mate to our most famous delicacy in Daymere." The bartender, while still maintaining his cold expression, pushed open the door and entered the kitchen. Soon he brought out a plate of red and white, finely cut cured meat. 5 pounds. He didn't look at Sea Eagle Logan, and he instead looked straight at Klein. 5 pounds. Sea Eagle Logan turned his head to the side, smiling warmly as he raised his arm to show his muscles. "Everyone just heard it. In order to thank me, you offered to treat me to some special cured meat." For a moment, Klein didn't realize what had happened. It was only when the bartender urged him a second time that he realized he was being blackmailed. Furthermore, their scam was rather well planned. First, they used an easily seen-through farce to let Sea Eagle Logan appear, thereby winning a good impression with the target. Then, with the excuse of treating the target, order an especially expensive special cured meat. And then finally, he goes back on his word and turns matters upside down, enforcing a sale. It's no wonder that when Rat Woody was thrown out, those drunkards didn't make a sound. They were all afraid of this Logan, who's rumored to be in the service of Admiral Hell. How should I deal with this? My present persona is J.M. and Sparrow, a somewhat crazy adventurer and bounty hunter. Klein raised his cup and drank a mouthful of the rich malt-flavored beer and said with his usual tone, "Why don't you just rob me? Why don't I just rob you?" Logan was a little stunned by the question. Soon after, he saw a fist expanding before his face. Thump! Klein's left fist landed on Sea Eagle Logan's chin, knocking him backwards toward the bar counter. With a push of his right palm, Klein nimbly left his chair and approached Logan's falling body. His legs tensed and his knees jerked upward, slamming into Logan's lower abdomen. Logan threw back his head, his eyes bulging while his mouth hung half open. Klein drew his gun, shoved the revolver into the man's mouth, and pulled the hammer back. I am," Logan shouted indistinctly. Klein looked him in the eye, pulled out his revolver and swung it, striking the side of Logan's face with the butt of the gun. Logan's teeth fell out one after another, and his mouth was stained with blood. Faced with such a heavy blow and a pain that exceeded his limits, his eyes rolled back and he fainted. Klein propped him up and pulled a handful of loose bills and coins out of his pocket. Since he estimated that there wasn't more than 5 pounds, with just a glance, Klein threw them on the bar and calmly said, "Keep the change." The bartender's bronze face turned slightly pale as he shouted in panic, "My boss is White Shark." Without looking at him, Klein released his hand and allowed Sea Eagle Logan to fall to the ground. Then he sat down again, forked up a piece of cured meat, and stuffed it in his mouth to taste it. He found it rather unique as the flavors of the condiments spread out in wisps, scratching at his belly and throat. After eating 2 pieces, he looked up and asked, "Does your boss know that you're colluding with Sea Eagle?" No, the bartender mumbled an answer. Seeing that Klein had no intention of continuing his attacks and had paid the bill so quickly, the bouncers who had gathered nearby silently retreated. Klein took a sip of his wine, glanced at Sea Eagle Logan on the ground, and calmly said to the bartender, "He's Ludwell's informant. How much is his bounty worth?" "No, he's not." The bartender shook his head and said, "This is just something he says about himself, the information he spread himself. That Navy sailor from before was hired by him. That's the only way to make everyone here afraid of him." Upon hearing this answer, the drinkers at the bar all put down their glasses in surprise. Some of the drunkards even staggered over to Logan and spat in his face. Pewee, pewee, pewee. Many drinkers followed suit. Klein lowered his head again and said while eating the special cured meat, "Tell me about the recent rumors." The bartender breathed a sigh of relief as he wiped his glass and gave an intermittent account of the rumors in the past 2 months. Some of them were what Klein had heard before, and there were also things he just learned. The Imperial Navy's ironclad warship, Pritz, had destroyed a passing pirate crew during routine training. Panic over the behemoth's cannons has begun to spread among the small and medium-sized pirate powers. Some of them even wished to take advantage of the ironclad warship, fleet's inchoate form, to madly commit crimes before withdrawing from this trade with a sum of money. The sea wouldn't be peaceful for the next 6 months to a year. Admiral of Blood Center and Vice Admiral Dusk Bulatov, Ivan had a conflict in the southern waters of Sonya Island, and each of them lost 2 ships in the massive skirmish. Klein listened without asking questions, and he gradually filled his stomach. Seeing that the plate containing the special cured meat had been emptied, and having finished the rest of his beer, he slowly stood up. "Remember today's lesson." Klein handed the plate to the bartender. The bartender was about to reach out when the hair at the back of his head was grabbed. Bang! Klein shoved him down hard, knocking the bartender's head against the bar top, sending splinters flying and blood gushing. The customers all tried to avoid the impact, and the bouncers rushed over quickly. After doing all of this, Klein clapped his hands and picked up his own glass, trying to pour the rest of the beer onto the bartender's head. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. Klein silently gave up. He turned around and bent down, grabbed Sea Eagle Logan, and threw him to the bouncers who were rushing over. Taking advantage of the moment when the bouncers were dodging and the bar being in chaos, Klein quickly ran, agilely circling around them, and easily left flying fish and wine. He pushed down his hat and quickly proceeded forward, turning towards a neighboring street. After continuously changing directions, he suddenly slowed down his pace, and a gold coin appeared in his hand. The gold coin kept weaving around in his fingers as if it was scouting something. 499 solicitation ding. The gold coin quietly flipped up, tumbled down, and firmly lay in the palm of Klein's hand. Lowering his head to glance if it was heads or tails, Klein spun his heel and smoothly turned into a quiet, dark alley. The wind by the sea was cold and strong, and it caused a convection in the area, propelling his coat up without him realizing it and causing his half-top hat to almost fall off. Suddenly, Klein stopped, turned around, and said in a deep voice, "Come out." His eyes were sharp as he stared at the shadow around the corner. After 4 or 5 seconds of silence, a figure emerged from the shadows. He chuckled and said, "Very sharp." It was a man in a black cloak, approximately 30 years of age, and his eyebrows were charred yellow while his dark blue eyes were bright. His face wasn't too chiseled, as though he was from the area south of Intes, Lemberg, and Seger. As soon as he saw him, a picture flashed in Klein's mind. As he entered the flying fish and wine, he had professionally looked around for anyone he needed to pay attention to. The answer at the time was no. The man had been drinking like a sailor and watching curiously from the side. He was no different from the other guests, and his appearance wasn't distinctive, but his black cloak had left a certain impression on Klein, allowing him to recognize the person who tailed him in an instant. "What do you want?" Klein, who was maintaining his persona, bent down slightly, like a huge feline ready to pounce. The man in the black cloak laughed once again. "The fighting technique and handling method that you displayed just now was very consistent with my taste. I chased after you to ask if you're interested in joining us, although that guy named Logan was indeed pretending to be an informant of Ludwell. White Shark Hamilton does have connections with many pirates. He's a character with a shady background, so he'll definitely take your act of beating up one of his men at the bar to heart. There will definitely be problems for you in the future, and I can help you resolve this problem. You're an adventurer, so it's necessary for you to have dreams of treasure. As for us, we're people who banded together in a bid to seek treasure such as the Spectre Empire, Solomon's Inheritance, the secret of the Fountain of Unaging, the Death's Key, the Sunken Laurel, and Roselle's treasure while traveling the 5 seas. Today, although we haven't accomplished any of our main goals, we've found many missing pirate ships." Heh heh, what I said does sound like what that rat had said, right? Find authorized novels in Webnovel Faster Updates. Better experience, please click www.webnovel.com for visiting. He cleared his throat and said, "Frankly speaking, we're a band of pirates formed from a group of adventurers, but we only plunder merchant and passenger ships when we're especially poor, and we don't harm the innocent. Our main focus is on finding treasures, and we often reap harvests. And I kid you not, I once slept on a bed formed of gold coins. If we run into any other pirate ships, just showing them our prowess wins us some compensation. By the way, our captain has decreed that before we recruit new people, we have to explain our creed and remuneration." Creed. Your captain is a little interesting. Klein deliberately softened his tension to see if the enemy would take the opportunity to attack. The black-cloaked man smiled in a relaxed manner. "What I said previously was our creed, and now let me talk about the remuneration." This fellow is quite confident. Although he wasn't a spectator, Klein could tell that he was very confident and that he was completely unfazed by the scene in front of him. "We don't have any weekly salaries or annuity, but once we find treasure or obtain riches from plundering, they'll be distributed according to our ranks. Under normal circumstances, when our luck is still pretty good, the lowest-ranking sailor can earn about £200 to £300 a year. I heard that this would make one a member of the middle class on land. Heh heh. If we find the sunken laurel, all of us will become tycoons," the black-cloaked man casually introduced. "According to our ranks, we would get different days off every month, but they can only be accumulated together and done in a staggered fashion." As he spoke, he suddenly cursed softly. "Dog's tea, just the year before, we missed a good chance of finding the Spectre Empire because Captain was on holiday. Pirates have annual leave." Klein found it somewhat surprising. He could only feel the pirate crew's comedic intensity from the man's description, reminding him of the humorous Somali pirate recruitment advertisements he had seen in his previous life. Seeing that Klein appeared shocked by his words, the black-cloaked man added with a smile, "As an adventurer, are you still chasing after the powers that transcend nature as told in legends? As long as you join us, you'll have a chance to possess them." Having said that, he coughed and said, "I forgot to introduce myself." His expression turned solemn, no longer looking as jocular as he was before. "Rear Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards's subordinate, 4th bosun of the Golden Dream, Blazing Danitz." After reporting his title, real name, and identity, Danitz waited patiently for the look of panic and fear to appear on Klein's face. After a second, he heard the adventurer, who acted somewhat crazily despite looking refined and polite, say in a low voice, "Blazing Danitz with a bounty of £3,000. Danitz was about to reply when he had the illusion that the man standing in the dark alley had turned into an indescribable, hungry monster, salivating over his soul and flesh. He suddenly clenched his fists, his body no longer as relaxed as it had been earlier. He was so tense that he was trembling slightly. His intuition told him that he was facing an abyss filled with madness and bloodlust. In this state, Danitz had no idea how much time had passed until the other party spoke again. "Why are you here?" "I'm on vacation." Blazing Danitz's dignity made him scorn to answer this question, but his instinct made him spit out the reason. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt the man retract his gaze, the hunger to gnaw on his flesh and soul disappearing. He stood where he was and watched as the young adventurer in a black coat and a silk half-top hat turned around and walked to the other end of the alley. He stopped when he was about to turn the corner, and turning his head, he asking, "Where's White Shark?" "Age. He lives at 1C Wall Avenue, but he spends most of his time on the second floor of the Flying Fish and Wine." "It's no different today," Blazing Danitz answered truthfully. Only when the figure disappeared into the distance did Danitz straighten his back and take off his cloak. "What a terrifying fellow," he sighed silently. Following that, he found his thoughts and muttered to himself, "I have to inform Captain that there's another terrifying person at sea. This is a guy who looks like a gentleman on the outside, but he has a heart like a lunatic's. If one doesn't have the determination and confidence to kill him, it's best not to deal with him." Danitz pulled up his black cloak's hood and decided to return to the hotel for some sleep. He planned to wait until the telegraph office opened the next morning before relaying the message to his middleman contact in the Rörsted archipelago. As for what would happen to White Shark, he didn't care at all. In the corner of another quiet street, Klein stood in the shadows, looking down at the black glove on his left hand. He found that, although creeping hunger had been sealed by Mr. Azek, its thirst for flesh and souls still intrinsically existed and was trying to manifest itself. Under normal circumstances, Klein wasn't worried that the sealed item would produce any problems, but when he had the urge to kill someone, the corresponding influence he would receive was enough to let that hunger which could lash back at him emanate. Earlier, when he heard that Danitz was a famous pirate on the bounty list, killing intent instantly rose inwardly out of his yearning desire, causing creeping hunger to become as active as a fish in water. Fortunately, Klein always had good self-control in this aspect. From his words, he was able to judge that he wasn't a pirate who was riddled with sin, so he easily restrained his impulse. With creeping hunger, J.M. Sparrow's persona will be flawless. Klein paused for a few seconds, took out a gold coin and performed 2 divinations. First, he divined if Blazing Danitz was lying, and second, if White Shark Hamilton was able to cause harm to him. The first revelation showed that there was no need for Blazing Danitz to lie, and the second one showed that White Shark Hamilton was unable to cause harm to him. Klein put away the gold coin, pressed down his hat, and while doing so, he swept his palm down and touched his face. He instantly changed his appearance: blonde hair, blue eyes, and ordinary facial features. Then, Klein unbuttoned his overcoat and pulled up the inner shirt so that it was no longer stuffed into his trousers. After a simple change of his attire, Klein, who didn't carry a cane, began sweating. His lips were dry as he identified the direction and headed back to the Flying Fish and Wine bar. On the way, he met Blazing Danitz again. The man only glanced at him once before withdrawing his gaze and headed for the hotel opposite the bar. After inspecting the bounty wall, Klein calmly reached out with his hand, pushed open the door and walked in. At this moment, it had been less than 10 minutes since he escaped. In the bar, most of the customers had dispersed, but there were still a lot of drunkards gathered here to watch the show. Their eyes swept over the new guest, but they all withdrew it soon after, and Klein made his way unimpeded to the bar counter. He saw the bartender standing with frightened eyes beside a fat man, his forehead heavily bandaged with white bandages, his nostrils stuffed with tissue paper, and his face was bruised. The fatty was tall and big. His skin was fair and he looked like a big white shark that had swam itself ashore. He touched his shiny bald head and said to Ellen, who was wearing a dark red jacket and a straight sword, "Someone told me that you know that guy. There are only 3 passenger ships that dock today, so there won't be many unfamiliar outsiders. Don't try to lie." Ellen patted the hilt of his sword and smiled casually. "Yes, he is my passenger. But the problem today clearly stemmed from your people. So I just want him to come back here, apologize to me, and compensate me for the damage done to the bar," the tall, big-sized white fatty said with a frown. Ellen laughed and said, "White shark, I have a proverb from my hometown. Don't hate wild dogs that pass by just because of the rats in the storehouse." "Just Ellen, is this your answer?" White Shark Hamilton narrowed his eyes. Ellen gripped the wooden handle of the musket, took a step forward, and said with a deep voice, "Yes, this is my answer." "Captain Shore has his way of doing things." Klein was slightly surprised at Ellen's response. After staring at each other for a few seconds, White Shark Hamilton took in a deep breath. "You've helped me before, so I don't need an apology. However, he must compensate half of my losses and you will be the one to pass them on." "Good suggestion." Ellen smiled. White Shark Hamilton's face darkened as he looked around. He suddenly threw out his hand, slapping the bartender in the face. The bartender flew out, all his teeth dropping to the floor. Klein quietly watched from 5 meters away as if none of this had anything to do with him. 500 interrogating White Shark bam. The bartender fell to the ground, writhing in pain. White Shark Hamilton snorted and didn't say anything. He turned around and walked towards the 2nd floor, stepping on the creaking wooden stairs. After the excitement was over, the drunkards dispersed one by one. Unaffected, Captain Elland and the others returned upstairs to continue playing cards. Klein took the opportunity to follow. He returned to flying fish and wine, not to deal with White Shark, who didn't pose any threat to him, but rather to simply get more information from the owner of the bar, who was connected to many pirate factions. After all, he had named his new identity Jayaman, which secretly implied hunting pirates whose hands were stained with blood. He planned on using their souls, flesh, and beyonder characteristics to replace the souls in creeping hunger who were awaiting their release. There was no gas in Daymere Harbor, and the corridor on the 2nd floor was relatively dark. The brass candle stands that were inlaid into each wall flickered and dimmed. Klein observed the surroundings as he wiped his face, silently transforming into one of the bouncers on the 1st floor. He used illusion creation to compensate for his mismatched attire. After finishing his preparations, he walked towards the room that his spiritual intuition identified as belonging to White Shark Hamilton. He first passed the card room, but he didn't attract anyone's attention. He stopped in front of the bouncers who were guarding the corridor and said in a low voice, "There's something going on downstairs again." "Holy Lord of Storms, what's happening tonight?" a bouncer sighed. "I hope those beautiful people don't get hurt," another guard said worriedly. He was referring to the whores who got their business in the bar. "They're fine." Klein stepped past the bouncers and knocked on White Shark's door. "Who is it?" Hamilton warily asked. "Boss, it's me. Something happened downstairs again." Klein remembered the information he gleaned while watching the commotion and deliberately hoarsened his voice. "Damn it," Hamilton bellowed. "Come in and explain to me what happened." Klein turned the doorknob and walked in. When he closed the door, he dispelled the illusion, and the muscles on his face rapidly squirmed, returning to his previous identity, a new customer with blonde hair, blue eyes, and ordinary facial features. "You?" Hamilton was stunned for a moment before he immediately opened his mouth wide in an attempt to shout loudly. At the same time, many illusory fish scales surfaced on the back of his hand, his originally large and fat body burgeoning. Suddenly, his heart began to beat faster, and a strong instinctive fear seized him by the throat. At this moment, he felt that the stranger standing by the door was a demon that had been starved for many days, repeatedly examining his flesh and soul with an ice-cold, craving look in his eyes. All of a sudden, White Shark Hamilton was gripped by an extreme panic, and he failed to effectively respond. Klein slowly walked to the sofa and sat down. He politely smiled. "Now, can we talk calmly?" The feeling of being stared at by a horrifying monster suddenly disappeared. Hamilton relaxed all of a sudden while his body shriveled up a lot like a punctured balloon. He didn't rashly cry for help as he asked with beads of sweat lining his forehead, "Who are you? What do you want?" "A hunter," Klein answered casually. "I heard that you're connected to a number of pirate factions. I would like to know their respective situations." "No, I'm not," White Shark Hamilton subconsciously denied. He immediately felt the extreme hunger again, and he felt as if the man's eyes were dyed with a dark red layer. Klein inwardly deliberated over his persona and said with a gentlemanly smile, "You have two choices. One is to answer frankly. The second is to be killed by me and then answer honestly. Killing to channel my spirit." White Shark Hamilton had heard of similar rumors. He swallowed hard and asked, "Why do you want to know about any of this?" Klein smiled and answered, "I'm a hunter, so I'm chasing after bounties." Hamilton suddenly felt that the man's polite smile was tinged with an indescribable madness, and he couldn't help but blurt out, Are you mad? I've seen many similar adventurers, but all of them have been buried at the bottom of the sea. It's not hard to kill a lone pirate, but can you defend against any further retaliation? The whores in the bar or the seemingly ordinary customers might all be pirate informants. Your friendly accomplice could be bribed at any moment and you'll be shot in the back. The pirates will gather information in advance and surround your ship. Can you protect all the passengers? Can you survive a cannon bombardment? On the sea where there's no room to run, how are you going to survive? After venting the horror in his heart in one breath, he saw the man who called himself a hunter reveal a gentle and kind smile. Just have them all killed, and then there won't be such a problem. A true madman. White Shark Hamilton immediately took a deep breath and said, "I'm in contact with many pirates, but it's a passive relationship. They need to sell the cash, jewelry, and goods that they plundered in exchange for alcohol, food, fresh water, weapons, and women's comfort. This has to happen through me, but I can only wait here for them. I don't know where their ships pass or where they're going." "What else?" Klein asked calmly. His reply just now was mainly to scare White Shark. As for having revenge sought on him by the pirates, he wasn't worried at all. As a faceless, he might as well find a place to drown himself at the bottom of the sea if they could find him so easily. Find authorized novels in Webnovel Faster Updates. Better experience, please click www.webnovel.com for visiting. And White Shark Hamilton's throat moved, without immediately giving an affirmative or negative description. He tightly closed his mouth and looked at the gentleman in the half-top hat. The gentleman's eyes were calm and reserved, as though madness was brewing within him. The uneasy silence was like the calm sea surface before a storm, gently resounding, colliding, and fermenting. Finally, Hamilton shifted his gaze away and placed his hand on the desk in frustration. "Yes, I'm still gathering information for them. If there's any urgent information, I'll use the radio transceiver they gave me to alert them." White Shark didn't dare to take the risk and was afraid that the man possessed unique Beyonder powers that could determine if he was speaking the truth or if he was saying the whole truth. Radio transceiver, Klein, who had succeeded in laying his bets, sharply caught onto a noun. "That's what they call it when speaking to me. It's like a telegram, but it doesn't require a wire." Hamilton turned and walked over to the gray safe and squatted down. A wireless telegraph. The pirates possess such advanced technology. Klein could vaguely guess what the radio transceiver was. He had previously thought of inventing something like this, but when he flipped through relevant magazines, he realized that wireless telegrams had long since appeared. However, it hadn't found its place in the commercial world. The Berserk Sea, which separated the northern and southern continents with its constant thunder and lightning. The chaotic magnetic field and violent storms made only a few sea routes accessible. Even if one was equipped with wireless telegraphs, they were almost useless. Similarly, the weather in the Fog Sea and the Sanya Sea had changed drastically, and there were a number of factors that affected electromagnetic transmission. The use of wireless telegrams had been severely restricted. Could it be that there's an enhanced model that can solve some of those problems? Klein watched as White Shark pried open the floor plank in front of the safe and twisted a mechanism to reveal a secret door in the wall. Behind the secret door was a hidden cabinet with 3 levels. On the top level were some documents and bills, a revolver, a new type of half-arm gun, and other weapons, while the bottom layer was filled with complicated black machinery. With just a glance, Klein deduced from his previous life's impression and the information he had gathered previously that the mechanical construct belonged to a radio transceiver. That's what they call it. It's called a radio transceiver. The news it transmits can be received by similar items as far as the Rorsted Archipelago. Any further and it'll depend on the weather and one's luck. Usually, it's very troublesome and limited. Hamilton didn't know much about the machine, and he was vaguely describing the corresponding situation based on his experiences using it and what he had been taught. It's better than the new radio transceivers that are now being commercialized. I wonder who invented it. Klein quietly listened and asked, "Who are they?" He made himself look like a bounty hunter who didn't understand technology. White Shark Hamilton wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and said, "Silver Coin Viper Odor, who claims to serve the owner of the Dawn, as well as the intelligence officer of Admiral of Blood, Old Quinn. They appeared together, and I can't be certain if they're working together. Of course, Odor has always only made claims. The owner of the Dawn, that Queen Mystic." Klein looked away, a gold coin appearing in his hand. The gold coin kept weaving between his fingers before finally leaping into the air and landing. It left White Shark puzzled as he trembled in fear and trepidation. Lowering his head to take a glance, Klein slowly stood up. At this moment he suddenly asked, "Who gave you the potion?" "Old Quinn." Hamilton hesitated but still chose to answer honestly. Klein nodded and no longer asked. He turned and walked towards the door. Thud. The wooden door opened and closed. The figure wearing a black coat disappeared from White Shark's room. Hamilton held his breath, waited for more than 10 seconds, and finally let out a long sigh. He quickly wiped the sweat from his face, placed the radio receiver on the desk, flipped through a code book, and hurriedly sent a telegram into the distance. I was targeted by an unfamiliar fellow. Beside the completely engrossed Hamilton, Klein had his hands in his pockets as he quietly watched, taking in the entire frequency spectrum and the passcodes. His departure just now was just a large-scale magic show, more than enough to deal with a low-sequence beyonder like White Shark's Seer Pathway. As for the question of whether or not he would be able to remember the details later, a seer didn't need to worry over it. A dream divination was enough to recall everything. Admiral of Blood and his men enjoy killing and love blood. They're passionate about enacting violence against women. Every time they rob a passenger ship, they would always cause a tragedy. This is public information known by everyone, and they themselves were proud of it. They're never stingy with their proclamations. The target of the hunt and the risk involved, I'll give priority to them. Klein thought for a moment, and then prepared to leave the room while Hamilton tidied and put away the radio transceiver. He didn't plan on dealing with White Shark for the time being, as he was afraid of disturbing the real prey. Anyways, this kind of fellow who was on land with a fixed territory could be easily dealt with in a letter later, since he had dirt on him. Klein's soundless footsteps caused the door to slowly open and then quietly close, bringing in a slight cool breeze.